Mom, Jason began, his voice too casual to be kind about staying here. It's not fair if you don't pitch in. No rent, no stay. The room froze. Even the jazz music seemed to catch its breath. Sabrina, his wife, gave a little laugh, one of those light social laughs that only make the silence heavier. "Oh, Jason," she said, though her tone wasn't really correcting him. Evie looked at her son, the man she'd once rocked to sleep on nights he couldn't breathe through his baby coughs. His face was different now, tight, efficient, like a man balancing a budget that didn't include love. She pressed her palm flat against the table to keep it from trembling. "I didn't know family dinners came with a lease," she said, dry and level. Tommy, her 10-year-old grandson, stopped twirling his fork. His eyes darted between the adults, sensing that something invisible and heavy had dropped into the room. No one spoke. Even the kettle in the kitchen hissed quietly, as if filling the silence with a sound that wasn't quite boiling, not yet. When your child tells you you've outstayed your welcome, it doesn't sound like thunder. It sounds like silverware clinking against china, like someone turning off the part of you that still believed in home. Sabrina reached for her wine glass, pretending to sip. Jason's gaze stayed fixed on his plate. "Well," he said after a beat, "I just think it's time we talk about fairness. You know bills are getting higher," and Evie cut him off gently. "Bills, I know. I've been paying them since before you were old enough to spell the word." Her tone wasn't sharp. It was tired, precise, like the sound of a knife finding the edge of a bone. Jason sighed, trying to sound patient. "Mom, you don't have to take it personally. It's just, we all have responsibilities." Sabrina nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Everyone contributes. It's not about money, it's about respect." Evie smiled thinly. "Respect? I must have misplaced mine somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the mortgage." Another silence. This one longer. Tommy looked at his grandmother. "Grandma, do you have to pay to live with us?" Jason's chair scraped hard against the tile. "Tommy, eat your food." People talk about old age like it's a reward for surviving the first 60 years. They don't mention the part where you become a guest in the house you once paid for. When the meal ended, everyone scattered. Jason to his laptop, Sabrina to her phone, Tommy to his video games. Evie stayed behind, collecting the plates she'd cooked for them, roast chicken glazed with honey, her grandmother's recipe. She moved slowly, methodically. Each scrape of ceramic echoed a memory. The first mortgage payment she'd made with her late husband's overtime check. The nights she worked 2 shifts at the school cafeteria just to afford braces for Jason. And now, here she was back at the sink, washing dishes in a house that no longer wanted her. She could see her reflection faintly in the window above the sink, the lines on her brown skin deeper under the soft kitchen light. A lifetime of standing, serving, smiling. Her hands still smelled faintly of garlic and soap. Behind her, the clock ticked again. 7:43. That same hour every evening since the day her husband passed. I've been called a lot of things in 60 years. Cook cleaner, Miss Evie, from the cafeteria. Never thought I'd be called extra mouth, not by my own child. She took a slow breath, exhaled through her nose, then turned off the flame. The hiss faded, leaving only the tick of the clock. She looked at the set of keys hanging by the back door, 3 on a ring. One for the house, one for her old sedan, one for the storage locker she hadn't visited since George's funeral. She reached for them, paused. Her eyes shifted to the dining table, the plate spotless, the chair still pushed back, the faint imprint of her grandson's hand on the glass of water he'd spilled earlier. A family scene that would look warm in a photo, but felt cold in real life. She whispered softly into the dark room. "No rent, no stay, huh?" The corner of her mouth curved, half sadness, half quiet disbelief. That night, the kettle boiled louder than my patience, and when it stopped, so did something else. "My name is Evelyn Monroe. I'm 60 years old. I've cooked for other people's children my whole life. But that night, I realized maybe it was time to serve myself for a change." The house was finally silent. Not peaceful, just emptied of noise, the kind of silence that hums like something left unplugged. Evie stood at the sink, looking at the stack of clean plates drying on the rack. Every dish she'd washed that night gleamed under the weak light like little trophies of patience. Her reflection shimmered in the window, steady eyes, straight back lips, pressed together in something that wasn't quite a smile. She dried her hands, turned off the kitchen light, and started packing. She didn't take much, just what belonged undeniably to her. 3 blouses, 1 cardigan, 2 pairs of slacks, her old prayer book, a framed photo of George on their wedding day, and her recipe notebook, edges soft from decades of grease and sugar and laughter that used to fill a kitchen, not empty yet. Everything else she left behind, the curtains she'd bought, the couch she'd paid for, the memories that didn't want her anymore. She stood still for a moment, hand on the suitcase handle, eyes drifting to the counter. The muffins. She'd baked them that morning, banana walnut, Jason's favorite since he was 5. He'd once begged her to make them for the entire kindergarten class. Now he probably didn't even remember the smell. Evie unwrapped 2 muffins, still golden and soft, and placed them neatly on a white plate in the center of the dining table. Then she reached for a sticky note and wrote in her round, teacherly handwriting, "Feed the extra mouth." She looked at the words for a long time. Then she laughed quietly, a sound that caught in her throat, halfway between humor and heartbreak. Some people leave angry letters or broken dishes. I left muffins, because dignity shouldn't have to shout to make its point. She took one last look around the room. The couch where Tommy had fallen asleep watching cartoons. The photo shelf where Jason and Sabrina's wedding picture stood in front of the old family portrait as if to eclipse it. The kitchen clock still frozen at 7:43. She exhaled slowly. Then she reached for the door. The sound echoed just enough to feel final. The cold night air brushed against her cheeks as she stepped onto the porch. The moon hung low and heavy like it was tired of watching people pretend to love each other nicely. She dragged her small blue suitcase down the driveway, its wheels clicking against the concrete, rhythmic, defiant, almost musical. At the corner of the street, a porch light flicked on. Evie. The voice carried the rasp of cigarettes and decades of unfiltered truth. Lydia Cruz stood in her robe, rollers still in her hair, holding a half-empty wine glass like a badge of experience. Her yard smelled of lavender and rain and gossip waiting to happen. She squinted through the night. "Is that you dragging luggage at midnight, Lord? Don't tell me Jason tried to rent you out again?" Evie burst into a laugh, sharp, short, real, something like that. Lydia stepped off the porch robe, flapping like a cape. "Well, you look like someone who just fired her own family." "I guess I did," Evie said, pulling the suitcase closer. "No severance package, though. Severance, honey. You should have charged interest." Lydia motioned toward her house. "Come on in before your pride catches pneumonia." I hadn't laughed in weeks. Turns out the sound of someone understanding you without needing the details was louder than any apology I'd never get. Inside Lydia's house, the walls were cluttered with framed photos and potted plants that didn't know when to stop growing. It smelled of cinnamon hairspray and faint rebellion. Lydia poured Evie a glass of cheap boxed wine. "This place is called the Halfway Inn," she said, raising her glass. "For broken hearts and bad knees." Evie grinned. "Then I'm overqualified." They clinked glasses. The sound rang light, healing, almost holy. Later that night, Evie sat by the small window in the guest room suitcase by her feet. She could see Jason's house faintly in the distance, the faint glow of the porch light still on. She thought about calling him, saying something final, something clever. But what could she say that didn't already fit on that sticky note? Words are cheap. Paper costs less. But silence. Silence makes people look at what they did instead of what they meant to say. Her phone buzzed once. A text from Jason. Just one line. "You didn't have to leave like that." Evie read it twice, then turned off the screen. She whispered to herself, "No rent, no stay." Then she smiled, not bitterly this time, but like someone who finally understood the math of self-respect. People think leaving means running away, but sometimes leaving is just another form of staying with yourself. The rain eased. The clock on Lydia's wall ticked softly, steady and forgiving. Evie leaned back on the pillow, eyes closing. The last thing she heard before sleep was Lydia's voice through the wall, half laughing, half yawning. "Welcome to the Club Sugar. Membership dues are paid in heartbreak." Evie chuckled quietly. "I paid in muffins. The house behind me had its walls, its warmth, its people." But that night, I walked out with something more valuable proof of who I was, written on a yellow note and sealed with a muffin. The motel room smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. Lydia called it humble charm. Evie called it a receipt that screamed non-refundable. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her coat. The floral quilt crackled like paper beneath her palms. Lydia was already snoring softly in the next bed, lipstick, still on one slipper, halfway off. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper, the kind of quiet that usually means trouble's catching its breath. Evie reached for her small purse, everything she owned in one zippered pouch. She double-checked the wallet, her ID, the folded note she'd written that morning, but never sent. "I'm fine. Don't worry." She tore it in half. Nobody deserved the illusion. It was past midnight when it happened. The rattle of a metal handle, a sharp twist, then another. Someone was trying to open their door. Evie froze. Her hand shot to the flashlight on the nightstand, heavy metal, the kind schools used during power outages. Her pulse matched the tick of the wall clock. Wham! Another jolt on the door. Lydia stirred but didn't wake. Evie rose, every muscle coiled. The handle shook again, harder this time, the sound of impatience or intent. She stepped closer, flashlight raised like a small hammer of faith. "Wrong room," she said calmly, her voice low but steady. Another pause, then louder, "Wrong woman." Evie stood still for a long moment, waiting for the air to settle. Then she clicked off the light and exhaled. She lay awake until dawn. Somewhere between fear and fury, she realized she hadn't been afraid for herself. She was angry that even in peace, someone still thought they could twist the handle to her life without knocking first. The morning came gray and thin. Lydia was already up, robe tied loose, pouring motel coffee into 2 paper cups. "You didn't sleep," she said flatly. "Neither did the door." Evie replied, managing a dry smile. Lydia squinted toward the hallway. "You want me to go check the cameras?" "No. I already know what I'd see, someone looking for the wrong door." "You sure Evie stirred her coffee with the plastic stirrer until it snapped?" "Oh, I'm sure." After Lydia left for her shift at the diner, Evie decided to do what she'd always done best, take inventory. She sat at the little motel desk, pulled her suitcase close, and unzipped the inside flap. Out came an old metal lockbox, dull gray with the word security, half rubbed off. She hadn't opened it since George died. Inside lay what remained of her practical life: a small checkbook, a social security statement, 3 receipts from the school cafeteria payroll office, and a folder marked retirement file. The edges were yellow, the paper brittle. She opened it and frowned. Her pension summary was incomplete, the final year's contribution never processed. She skimmed the numbers again. Something was missing, about 8 months of payments, almost $14,000. I used to balance everyone else's ledgers, cafeteria budgets, vendor invoices, donation drives. But somewhere between all that, I forgot to check my own. Evie reached for her phone and scrolled down to Mr. Hayes' district accounting. She hadn't spoken to him since George's funeral. She hit call. A few rings. Then a familiar baritone, calm and faintly amused, "Still balancing everyone's books but your own, Evie." She closed her eyes for a moment, almost hearing the sound of his pencil tapping the rhythm of their old office. "I found some missing deposits. Hayes. Pension records from my last year. They were never finalized." "I remember," he said. "You left right before the system upgrade. Things got messy that month. The school board outsourced the processing. Some files went dark. Dark meaning unclaimed." A pause. "Come by my office tomorrow. We'll dig it up before someone else does." "Someone else?" she asked. "Just come early," he said, lowering his voice. "Bring ID, your employment certificate, anything you still have. Don't send copies. Don't email." The line clicked dead before she could respond. Evie stared at her reflection in the mirror above the motel desk. For a moment, she saw herself not as an old woman who'd been told to leave, but as a woman who'd left on her own terms. And now, maybe she was about to uncover something worth more than respect, something with numbers attached. She packed the documents carefully back into the lockbox, wrapped it with a dish towel, and slid it under the bed. Her hands shook, but not from fear, from the quiet thrill of purpose. The rain outside had stopped completely. The street beyond the window was washed clean, almost shining. But behind her, the clock on the wall kept ticking, mechanical, relentless. Every time that clock ticks, it sounds like math. And every number in my life, every bill, every favor, every debt is about to add up. Later that afternoon, Lydia returned from work carrying 2 paper bags, brought lunch. The cook owed me one for covering his smoke breaks. Evie smiled faintly. "You're still good at collecting what's owed." Always Lydia grinned. Then, noticing the open folder on the desk, she asked, "What's that, my pension file?" Evie said, matter of fact. $14,000 that vanished into bureaucracy. "I'm gonna find it." Lydia sat down, tearing open her sandwich. "Girl, you go from muffins to mysteries in 24 hours. What's next, tax evasion?" Evie smirked. "Redemption audit." They both laughed short, weary but alive. Evie stood adjusting her cardigan. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m. I'm going to the district office." Lydia raised her cup of soda like a toast. "Get your money, accountant lady." Evie chuckled. "I'm not just getting my money." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you getting?" Evie looked at the window where sunlight broke through the clouds and landed square on her reflection. Her expression softened, but her eyes sharpened. "My balance." People think revenge is loud, shouting, breaking, burning. But sometimes it's just arithmetic, and tomorrow I'm going to start doing the math. The district accounting office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same dusty air freshener, same buzzing lights, same gray file folders labeled in fading ink. Mr. Hayes stood behind his desk like a man who'd been born under fluorescent light. His tie was crooked, his hair silver, and his glasses magnified his eyes just enough to make him look perpetually suspicious. When Evie stepped inside, he smiled faintly. "Evie Carter. Thought I'd never see you without a hairnet and a spreadsheet." Evie chuckled. "Don't tempt me. I still carry a whisk and a calculator." He motioned for her to sit. On his desk was a thick folder already waiting labeled in block letters, "Evangeline Carter Retirement File." Her stomach tightened. Hayes adjusted his glasses. "You were right. Your records went into limbo the year they digitized the payroll. They owe you quite a bit." Evie frowned. "Quite a bit as in—" He turned the monitor toward her. Rows of numbers glowed across the screen like tiny soldiers in formation. Base pension, late contributions, missed interest adjustments, and a few things you never filed for deferred cost of living raises, medical incentive credits. He paused, scanning again, then typed quickly. The printer beside them began to whir. 1 page, 2, 3. Evie leaned closer. The total at the bottom of the page made her blink twice. $392,000. 17. 392,000, she repeated. Hayes nodded calm as if reading the weather. Not a penny less. The system compounded unpaid interest annually. You, my dear, are one of the few people who actually benefited from bureaucratic incompetence. Evie's mouth opened, but no words came. For a woman who'd balanced cafeteria budgets down to the last dime, this number was absurd. She finally whispered, "I was too busy raising Jason. I didn't have time to chase numbers." Hayes looked up, his voice softening. "Then let the numbers raise you for a change." Evie stared at the papers piling up page after page of her forgotten worth. Each sheet carried a timestamp, a date, a proof that every long night, every overtime shift, every lunch skipped had never really vanished. They'd just been waiting for her to notice. "Do I sign something?" she asked finally. Hayes slid a form across the desk. "Here. It'll take 2 weeks for processing. Direct deposit unless you want a check to frame above your kitchen sink." Evie laughed a sharp sound that surprised even her. "No, I'd rather frame this moment. It's cheaper." Hayes smirked. still frugal. You haven't changed." "Oh, I've changed," she said quietly, eyes locked on the total. "I just didn't know how much until now. For decades, I'd made peace with scraps, leftover love, leftover pay, leftover rooms in my own home. Now, for the first time, the world owed me." Hayes handed her a copy of the printed summary still warm from the machine. "You can call this poetic justice, Evie, or just overdue math." Evie folded it neatly, tucking it into her purse like a secret weapon. "You ever wonder why good people have to lose so much before life remembers them?" "Because we forget to invoice it," Hayes said dryly. She burst out laughing, the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep where pain and humor shake hands. They stood at the doorway for a long moment before she left. Hayes looked at her like a man watching an old ledger finally close clean. "You know, if you ever need someone to handle investments," Evie raised a hand. "Hayes, after today, the only investment I'm making is in lavender and silence." He smiled. "Then that's the soundest plan I've heard all week." Outside, the air felt different, charged, alive. She stood on the steps of the office, papers pressed to her chest. A breeze picked up scattering fallen leaves along the sidewalk. Each step she took felt lighter, as if the numbers in her purse weren't just money, but weight she'd finally turned into wings. People think freedom comes from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from a balance sheet. At the crosswalk, her phone buzzed a message from Jason. "Mom, can you talk tonight?" She stared at the screen for a long time, then typed one sentence, "I'll call when I finish something important." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, smiling faintly, because for once, what was important was her. "Guess I'm officially a profitable extra mouth," she muttered, shaking her head. The barista looked puzzled. "Sorry, ma'am," Evie smiled. "Just talking to my accountant, the universe. They once called me lazy for wanting rest, but I wasn't lazy. I was invested. And now the dividends were finally showing up. Let the paperwork speak." Then silence. Lydia's voice cracked through the motel silence like a fire alarm wrapped in lipstick. "Evie, honey, you better come see this." Evie didn't move right away. She was measuring tea leaves into a chipped mug, her daily ritual of order, the kind that kept her heartbeat slower than her thoughts. But when Lydia gasped, "It's your son's house," she turned. On the screen, status pre-foreclosure. Amount due $23,870 in unpaid property taxes. Auction countdown 48 hours. Lydia slapped the side of the laptop dramatically. "Would you look at that? Karma's not only real, it's on clearance." Evie said nothing. She just stared at the number, the very same house where her son once told her, "No rent, no stay." The irony didn't sting, it hummed. Lydia leaned in, whispering like it was sacred gossip. "You think that's why he's been so quiet? The man's drowning in property tax while flexing about his Tesla on Facebook." Evie exhaled through her nose, calm. "Social media's free. So are delusions. Are you going to tell him you know no?" she said, picking up her tea. "That's not my place." Lydia blinked. "Excuse me, not your place." "Honey, that's your house. Spiritually?" Evie stirred her tea slowly, the spoon clinking like a metronome. "This isn't revenge," she said softly. "This is acquisition." She opened a new browser tab, typed Colorado Secretary of State, Business Registration Portal, Name Field EM Holdings LLC, Purpose Real Estate Asset Management, Owner Evangeline Carter. Lydia leaned over her shoulder, grinning. "Girl, you sound like a Bond villain with a 401k. Evie smirked. "No capes, no villains, just spreadsheets." The confirmation email arrived instantly. "Welcome EM Holdings, LLC." Evie sat back watching the loading circle spin on her tea surface. The steam rose in slow ribbons twisting in the pale motel light. It looked like something burning away resentment, maybe, or fear. Lydia leaned back, folding her arms. "So what's the plan, boss lady? First we verify." Evie opened her email and typed a short note to Hayes, subject Brookpine Lane. "Foreclosure verification. Hayes, could you confirm the county auction date? E. Carter." He replied 5 minutes later. The man never slept, accountants rarely do. Evie, it's true. Auction is Friday, 10 a.m., sharp. And before you ask, yes, it's public. You can bid through proxy. But be careful. It's easy to confuse karma with closure. Evie typed back one sentence, then let's call it balance. Lydia was pacing the room, muttering to herself, "Girl, I can't believe this. He threw you out of that house like yesterday's trash, and now God's got him listed on Zillow." Evie smiled faintly. "I told you. The universe keeps receipts." Lydia stopped shaking her head in disbelief. "You're not even mad, are you?" Evie shrugged. "Anger's expensive. I prefer interest." She pulled out a small notebook, the same one she used years ago for grocery budgets and cafeteria orders. On the first clean page, she wrote in neat block letters, "Project Brookpine, Objective Acquire, Timeline 48 hours, Budget $392, $1,000 available." Then under it, she drew a single line and wrote almost like a prayer, "No rent, no stay." That night, she couldn't sleep. Not from excitement, from calculation. Every time she blinked, she saw that blue Zillow map, the property glowing like an old scar under a spotlight. "I used to think home was where your family let you stay. Turns out home is where your name ends up on the deed." By sunrise, Evie had a full plan. Hayes had sent over the auction details, including the link to register as an online bidder. She filled out every line with precision birth date, tax ID, business entity, address of record. The same calm, deliberate rhythm she used to slice onions at the cafeteria. Click, upload, confirm, done. Lydia stumbled out of bed, hair wrapped in a towel. "You're up early. Did we win the Powerball or something?" Evie smiled without looking up. "No, just buying back my peace one property at a time." Lydia poured herself coffee. "You really gonna do it? I'm just showing the universe I'm awake." The kettle boiled louder that morning. Maybe it was mocking me, or maybe it was celebrating because somewhere justice was steeping. Around noon, Hayes called. "Evie, the auction's still on, but listen, if you go through with this, make sure it's clean. No emotional paper trail." "Don't worry," she said. "I'm just an investor." "Right," he said dryly. "And I'm the tooth fairy." She laughed. "You're too pragmatic for wings." Evie closed her laptop and set her cup beside it. Her reflection shimmered in the steam. Lydia was watching her carefully. "You're not nervous." Evie shook her head. "No. For once, I'm not the one waiting to be chosen." She looked at the rising steam and said quietly to herself, "Revenge burns fast. Ownership lasts. They told me I was an extra mouth. Turns out I was just hungry for accountability." The county courthouse smelled like burnt coffee and nervous sweat. Every seat was taken real estate brokers, retirees with folders, and one woman in a teal headscarf biting her pen like it owed her money. Evie stood at the backhands folded over her small leather purse. She looked calm, dangerously calm. Inside her purse was her entire pasta checkbook, a USB drive, and a single Post-it that read, "EM Holdings, LLC." Lydia sat beside her oversized sunglasses and too much perfume whispering, "You ready, boss lady, because my heart rate monitor says I'm about to ascend." Evie smiled faintly. "Keep your pulse steady. We're not here for drama. We're here for decimals." That address. The words hung in the air like an old ghost walking back into the room. The auctioneer, a tall man with the charisma of a TV preacher, adjusted his tie and started his chant. "Opening bid 250,000, do I hear 250, 255, 260 hands shot up." Tablets clicked. A small sea of nods and numbers rose like waves. Evie lifted her paddle slightly, no hesitation, no glance sideways. 270. The crowd murmured. The man beside her in a beige suit shot her a look. She ignored him. Lydia nudged her. "Girl, that was smooth." Tick, tick, tick. 280, someone called. 290 Evie, 300. The room shifted. Even the auctioneer's eyebrows twitched. The price jumped in $20,000 increments. 320, 340. Evie's hand stayed steady. Her breathing slowed. Every inhale was the rhythm of confidence. Every exhale a lifetime of swallowing words she'd never said. And then the screen flickered. Her son's face filled the monitor, sharper jawline, slick suit, eyes blazing with disbelief. He wasn't there in person, but his voice sliced through the static. "You think I don't know who's bidding?" Lydia froze. Half the room turned. Evie didn't blink. She adjusted her glasses, raised her hand again, and said clearly, "$368,000. Sold," the auctioneer shouted. "Sold to EM Holdings, LLC for $368,000, even." The room erupted in murmurs and keyboard clatter as assistants logged the sale. Lydia jumped to her feet, hands in the air, retirement goals, baby. Several heads turned. She curtsied dramatically, then whispered to Evie, "Sorry, couldn't help myself." Evie finally let herself breathe, one slow, deliberate exhale, the kind that sounds like letting go of 20 years. She looked down at the paper. Her name wasn't on it, not directly, just those 3 sterile letters, EM Holdings, LLC. But she knew what they meant. I used to think power looked like shouting. Turns out it sounds like paperwork clicking confirmed. Lydia leaned closer. "So how's it feel owning the house of the man who evicted you?" Evie smiled faintly, eyes on the paper. "It feels like arithmetic." "You mean satisfying? I mean balanced." Outside, the sky had turned pale gold. Evie stepped into the sunlight, and for the first time, the courthouse door didn't feel like an exit. It felt like an entry. Her phone buzzed. A text from Hayes. "Congratulations. You just turned overdue pension into poetic justice." She typed back, "Justice compounded monthly." Lydia was skipping beside her like a woman half her age. "You realize we just outbid your son at his own game." "I didn't outbid him," Evie corrected gently. "I just closed his open account." Lydia laughed so hard she nearly dropped her purse. "Girl, you need to trademark those lines. I'd buy your merch. I didn't shout when he told me to leave. I didn't beg when he changed the locks. I just waited like interest." They reached Lydia's car, a sun-faded Corolla with a cracked dashboard. Lydia unlocked it with a triumphant beep. "Where to now?" millionaire Evie smiled. "Back to the motel. I've got paperwork to file." Lydia groaned. "You just won an auction." "Celebrate a little, I will," Evie said, opening the car door. "When the title transfer clears. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just clicks sold." Click! Jason adjusted his collar. His jaw twitched as if holding back years of frustration. Sabrina gripped her tote bag like it was a life vest. "I'm telling you, whoever bought this place is a crook," she whispered. "Who raises rent 40%. Jason muttered. "We'll confront them, get it reduced, maybe threaten to move out." Sabrina shot him a look. "With what savings, Jason?" He didn't answer. He just looked around at the other tenants, people murmuring, scrolling through phones, sipping bad coffee from styrofoam cups. At the front of the room, a chair sat empty. A single clipboard rested on the table. The air smelled like nervous anticipation and lemon cleaner. Heads turned. Evelyn Monroe stepped in calm, composed, wearing a soft gray blazer and her hair tied neatly back. She didn't carry a folder, not even a purse, only a single pen clipped to her sleeve. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady as polished steel. "Evelyn Monroe, the lazy mouth who bought your home." The room froze. Jason's coffee cup slipped from his hand, landing with a soft thud. Sabrina's lips parted, eyes glassy disbelief choking her voice. And from the back corner, Lydia, dressed like she'd walked out of a jazz club, snapped her fingers and shouted, "Now that's a mic drop!" A ripple of laughter, half shock, half admiration, spread through the crowd. Evie smiled faintly. "I'll take that as applause. You bought our house." That's insane." Evie's tone stayed measured. It was listed at a fair market price. Public auction. I just happened to have the winning bid. "You knew we lived there," he shouted. "You wanted to humiliate us." Evie folded her hands calmly on the table. "I didn't buy it to hurt you, Jason. I bought it to stop letting you decide my worth." Sabrina's mascara ran slightly. "You could have told us." "We could have." Evie cut her off softly. "Done what?" "Called me lazy again. Explained how family dinners come with leases." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that buzzed in the ears. Lydia leaned forward, whispering to the tenant beside her, You can't write better drama than this. Jason ran a hand over his face, shaking his head. So what now, Mom? You're my landlord, Evie tilted her head. Technically, yes, but don't worry, I'm not charging family interest rates. A few tenants chuckled. Even the moderator coughed into his fist, trying to hide a smile. Evie continued walking slowly toward the front row. When you called me an extra mouth, I went home and thought about what that meant. And I realized, maybe I was. But extra mouths still feed, people still cook, still give. The difference is, some people only count what goes in, not whatever came out. Jason's jaw tightened. Sabrina looked down at the floor, fingers clutching her purse. I don't want your apology, she said softly. I just want peace. And maybe a little silence at the dinner table. Lydia stood clapping again. Speech of the year, Evie turned slightly smiling at her friend. Sit down, Lydia, before you get us evicted from our own event. Lydia grinned. Too late, boss lady. I signed a 1-year lease under you. You can't fire me. Jason finally spoke, voice trembling between anger and shame. You think you've taught us something. You think owning the house fixes what you broke. Evie met his gaze evenly. I didn't break anything, Jason. You did when you put a price tag on love. The words hit like a quiet explosion. Even Sabrina flinched. I didn't buy your house to punish you, she said again. I bought it because I spent 60 years keeping everyone else's accounts balanced except my own. She took a deep breath. It was time I invested in myself. Sabrina's tears finally spilled. I didn't know what hard work looked like until now, she whispered. Evie nodded gently. Now you do. Jason sank into his chair, speechless. Lydia leaned toward him, whispering loud enough for everyone to hear, Son, if you're gonna insult your mama, make sure she doesn't have a mortgage broker on speed dial. The whole room burst into laughter. Even Jason cracked a helpless, ashamed smile. Evie raised her hand slightly, silencing the room. One more thing she said. For the record, she looked directly at Jason and Sabrina. You said I was an extra mouth. Pause. Turns out I had the appetite for ownership. Someone in the back whispered, Damn, that line should be in a movie. Lydia, it is now. Justice doesn't need revenge. It just needs a receipt. Lydia calls out from behind, Where to boss? Lady Evie smiles faintly. Home. Mine this time. Echo line. They said I was an extra mouth. Turns out I had the appetite for ownership. Evie knelt on the damp earth hands in soil that smelled of new beginnings. The once gray yard behind what used to be Jason's house now shimmered with color and laughter. Children's voices echoed faintly from inside the sound of the Haven Women's Co-op settling into their new shared home. A sign by the gate read, A place for mothers who start over, and for the women who never stopped. Evie wiped her brow, a streak of dirt across her cheek. Behind her, Lydia appeared in a wide-brimmed hat and neon gardening gloves. You know, Lydia said setting down a flat of lavender seedlings when I pictured retirement, it did not involve a shovel. Evie chuckled. When I pictured mine, it didn't involve buying back my son's house either. Yet here we are, gainfully unemployed. Lydia grinned. Gainfully glorious honey. He waved the plaque proudly. Fresh from Turner Carpentry and Plumbing, he announced. Multi-talented, underpaid, and occasionally profound. Lydia peered at the inscription and read aloud. Her voice softened. That's perfect. Cal shrugged. Credit to the boss lady here. Said it needed to sound less like revenge, more like redemption. Evie smiled faintly. Revenge rusts fast. Grace grows roots. They worked quietly for a while. Lavender stems bent in the light wind. Spades thudded rhythmically into the soil. Lydia sat back on her heels, stretching. So what's next for EM Holdings? Gonna buy a whole street of karma? Evie laughed. No more audits. I sold the house to the Haven Women's Co-op. Half the profit went to the Lydia Foundation. Lydia's head snapped up. Wait, what? You named a foundation after me. Evie shrugged. You kept me laughing through every storm. It felt appropriate. Lydia blinked hard, pretending to fan her eyes. Damn allergies. Cal smirked. Or emotions, Ms. Jazz Club. Lydia pointed her trowel at him. "Careful, Mr. Multi-Talented. I know where the hose is." She brushed the dirt from her fingers, then paused. In the quiet between them, the soft tick of her old pocket watch could be heard faint, but alive again. Jason stood there, a grocery bag in each hand. His posture was smaller now, humbled by time and consequence. Lydia leaned toward Evie. "Should I grab the hose after all?" Evie shook her head gently. "No. Let the boy speak." Jason approached slowly, raincoat zipped halfway expression, uncertain. He placed the bags on the porch table, fruit, bread, milk, a carton of eggs. "I wasn't sure what you needed," he said. Evie replied softly, "Nothing I can't grow." They stood there in silence, the distance between them filled not with anger this time, but unspoken understanding. Finally, Jason exhaled. "Mom, you were right. I thought you were lazy, but you were just done helping the wrong people." Evie looked at him, her eyes kind but steady. "Now you do." Jason nodded slowly like a student finally understanding a lesson he should have learned years ago. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," Evie answered. "That's enough." Cal cleared his throat loudly. "Well, this just got emotional. Anyone hungry? I brought muffins." Lydia gasped. "Wait, muffins? Your muffins?" Cal grinned. "My late wife's recipe. I call them second chances." Evie laughed. "Then they're perfect for this garden." They sat together on the porch steps, sipping tea from mismatched mugs, sharing muffins warm from the tin. Lydia toasted with her cup. To second chances and properly priced rent. Evie raised hers, to learning the value of what can't be priced. A small plaque gleamed under the sunlight. Cal tightened the final screw, stepped back, and admired it. He whistled low. "Not bad, huh?" Lydia smiled. "You know what I love most about this?" "The irony." Evie tilted her head. "Which part?" "That your initials are EM and it still stands for every miracle." Evie chuckled. "That's generous. I'd settle for enough mistakes." They all laughed. He looked down then at his mother. "You'll let me visit sometimes," Evie nodded. "Gardens need tending, and so do people." He smiled faintly, then walked away, not out of guilt this time, but with the quiet relief of release. Evie watched until he turned the corner, then turned back to her lavender bed. Lydia looked up. "Well, look at that. Even the weather knows when to cool off." Cal grabbed the toolbox. "I'm taking credit for the timing." Evie smiled, reaching out to catch a raindrop on her palm. "It's the garden's claws," she said softly. "Everything you plant comes back sometimes in the form of rain." The wind chimes jingled as the camera pulled back, revealing the full yard green, alive and new. "They said I was an extra mouth. Turns out I was the one who fed the story. Sometimes justice doesn't sound like a courtroom. It sounds like rain on lavender. Like forgiveness whispered between two people who finally stopped shouting. P.I. thought I lost my home, but maybe what I really lost was the need to be understood. Now, I grow what I can keep peace, purpose, and second chances. If this story found you at the right time, tell me where you're listening from. Maybe you've been Evie once, or maybe someone like Jason. Either way, thank you for staying until the last frame. Hit subscribe, leave an emoji if you believe in quiet justice, and check the pinned comment for today's reflection. This wasn't just a story about losing a house, it was about learning how to live inside yourself again.